Hello, everyone, and welcome to the U.S. Center at COP28. This event is Energy Transition Accelerator. And now I'm very excited to introduce Liz Yee, Executive Vice President of Programs at the Rockefeller Foundation.
Thank you so much.
Applause, everyone.
It's great to see you all today. Thank you so much for coming to spend time with us on the Energy Transition Accelerator. My name is Elizabeth Yee, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Programs at the Rockefeller Foundation. And on behalf of the leaders and partners in the Energy Transition Accelerator, I am very grateful for you being here today. Last week, the Foundation released a report that showed about 190 countries that makes it clear that it is possible to prevent global warming from breaking 2 degrees Celsius by 2090. It is possible, but it will require the world to help developed and emerging economies rapidly decarbonize. Because if we don't, the 81 countries considered energy poor today will continue to fuel their growth with carbon, and they could account for 75% of global emissions by 2050. And that would be catastrophic for our planet and everyone here living on it. So the world also needs to dramatically expand access to these renewables in those 81 countries. And the good news is this could empower the 3.5 billion people who currently live without enough electricity, with access to jobs and opportunity, 675 million right now who live completely in the dark. The challenge is, of course, helping these markets actually access the capital that we need, which we know collectively totals trillions of dollars from private, philanthropic, and other sources. And the world needs these new, innovative financing platforms to effectively achieve this transition. And that is why, for us, the Rockefeller Foundation, in partnership with the U.S. Department of State, the Bezos Earth Fund, came together a year ago at COP27 to announce the Energy Transition Accelerator, because the easy work has already been done. And our goal since that time has been to build a more innovative carbon finance platform that will catalyze the private capital needed to accelerate the transition from fossil fuel-based to clean power in developing and emerging economies. Over the past year, the team has been very, very hard at work, undertaking the extensive analysis, engaging stakeholders, and designing the framework that created the ETA. And we've engaged a group of more than 30 experts, governments, private sector, foundations, civil society leaders from all regions of the world, and I am proud to say we have established many new partnerships. We're collaborating with the World Bank today through their Scale Fund to support developing countries in undertaking ambitious energy transition strategies that deliver deeper, earlier emissions reductions. And we're very excited to be joined today by both country and company leaders who have expressed interest in continuing to engage with the ETA, several of whom you will hear from today. And this coalition that we've built will bring together willing sellers and buyers employing high integrity carbon crediting in support of faster energy transitions. And that crediting approach is what is outlined in the ETA core framework that we're presenting today. The ETA marketplace will aggregate demand for credits, creating a strong incentive for participating countries to intensify their near-term efforts to decarbonize their power sector. This could include retiring fossil fuel assets, deploying clean power, enhancing storage capacity, investing in transmission and distribution infrastructure, and developing the policies needed to enable that infrastructure to happen. And a portion of the finance generated will be used to address adaptation and resilience in the vulnerable countries. We look forward to sharing more details about the framework over the course of the discussions that are going to happen in the next hour. And so for now, I'm going to turn it over to my fellow colleagues and leaders of the Energy Transition Accelerator. I'm honored very much to introduce a dynamic and devoted leader who came up with this original idea that brings us all together today, Secretary John Kerry. Thank you so much.
Liz, thank you so much. What a terrific job you just did in describing this, but also you've been just fabulous every step of the way with the Rockefeller Foundation. Andrew Steer, likewise for the Bezos Earth Fund. And Jürgen Vogele, thank you. He is sitting in for the moment for Ajay Banga, who got delayed at the leaders' meeting. but we are partnering also with the World Bank in this, and we're appreciative of you being here, Jorgen. So last year at COP27, Andrew Steer and Raj Shah, obviously the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and I came together to make an announcement and introduce what we think is a bold new idea to help developing countries to be in a position that they can speed up their transition from dirty to clean power. And we called it the Energy Transition Accelerator. It also obviously has the ability to do it in some of the developing emerging economies of the world, which are super dependent on coal and from which many of the vast majority of the emissions that are doing such damage are coming. So we're really thrilled to come here today and report to you a huge amount of progress has been made because we have worked really carefully with a high-level consultative group that has been broadly inclusive, and we've brought critical folks together in order to be able to make sure there will be environmental integrity and clear guardrails and a clear road forward as we implement this. So in a few minutes, you're going to hear from countries and companies that are joining us on this vital journey. We're all joining forces for a simple reason. We see an urgent need, and we believe that the ETA offers a very promising solution. The need is crystal clear. If we're going to keep 1.5 degrees alive, Celsius, as a real benchmark, the North Star, if you will, for where we go forward in our climate planning and in our efforts, then developing countries must transition from dirty to clean power much more rapidly than we're doing today, and that includes these larger emerging entities that are responsible for the lion's share of these emissions. The IEA tells us that clean energy investment in developing and emerging economies, including China, must increase sevenfold, folks. Sevenfold by the early 2030s. So, for those of us who've been traveling around talking to people in various countries trying to figure out how are we going to motivate that money to deploy, well, you have to create the bankable deals. You have to make it attractive. You have to de-risk. You have to blend the finance. We've heard about this now for several years, but we haven't yet implemented it, and we haven't put in place the tools that will excite that. That is precisely the aim of the Energy Transition Accelerator. It's an innovative carbon finance platform that will help developing countries to attract the financial resources they need and be able to speed up the transformation of their electric power sectors. It is going to support ambitious, just energy transition strategies. And those strategies are strategies that will, one, deliver earlier and deeper emissions reductions. Two, address the needs of workers and communities in the transition. And three, help developing countries to be able to achieve their NDCs. The ETA is going to do this by building a powerful coalition of countries and companies who together are committed to deploying carbon markets to drive ambition and action. Lest anybody come here saying, well, we don't know about the carbon market. How many of you have heard of acid rain? Acid rain, you don't hear about it anymore because it's not as much problem anymore. And that's a carbon market that helped make that happen. So let me be clear. This is not the kind of carbon crediting that you read about in some headlines, unfortunately, occasionally. This is a high-integrity carbon crediting, the kind we need to be able to encourage people be able to be comfortable with this approach. Where a ton of credit represents an actual ton of emissions reduced. That's integrity. Where companies use credits to supplement, not to avoid, investment in reducing their own emissions. This is not a replacement. It's a plus-up. The kind of carbon crediting where real investment delivers real results, and those results can be profound, even catalytic. So carbon crediting under the ETA can generate tens of billions of dollars, and we now have the analysis that documents that. Countries can direct those resources where they are needed most, whether that's retiring a coal plant, scaling up renewables, building transmission lines, implementing new policies, or helping communities affected by the transition. The ETA also will include procedures to channel, and I think this is important, 5% of the credits generated are going to be able to raise additional funds for adaptation and resilience in vulnerable countries. So this has got a clear adaptation resilience component that will be most welcome because funds in those sectors are some of the hardest to come by. And that's only part of the story, folks. The direct revenue generated by this high-integrity crediting can be leveraged to unlock finance upfront, greatly increasing the financial flows. And we're looking at innovative ways to actually attract that upfront investment. We've run the numbers, and based on our preliminary estimates for 3 large fossil-heavy countries, the ETA could mobilize upwards of $200 billion in total transition finance just by 2035. That is on the order of 1/3 of these countries' total transition costs for the electric power sector. Now, obviously, the potential, therefore, is just enormous. That's just for those 3 countries. The core framework we're presenting today lays out the foundation for being able to realize these goals. And we're joined today by our first movers, governments that are signing on as pilot countries, and companies that are declaring their interest in becoming ETA buyers. These pioneers, and I want to single them out for a moment, these pioneers include Amazon, the Bank of America, Boston Consulting Group, BCG, and I'm particularly grateful to Rich Lesser, who has done, BCG has done an enormous amount as a thought partner, intellectual partner in all of this endeavor. Morgan Stanley, PepsiCo, MasterCard, McDonald's, Salesforce, Schneider Electric, and Standard Chartered Bank. I think that's a pretty impressive group of folks who make critical judgments and have been leaders in industry. And it's an indicator of their belief in the possibility of this coming together. So, when? By this coming Earth Day, a little more than 4 months from now, the ETA will be formally established as an independent initiative ready to do business. And our work over the past year to turn this idea into reality has benefited from this incredible group that came together in the highly consultative group analysis. A lot of long meetings, a lot of good thinking, a lot of very collegiate effort to pull people together in a smart way. I particularly, if you'll permit me, want to thank Elliot Derringer and Julia Christensen and Molly Peters Stanley, who unfortunately is the only one of those who is not here right now, because characteristic of Molly, she's an expert and she's off right now in the negotiations on the global stocktake, Article 6 work, doing what she is so expert at doing. So I thank each and every one of them. I want to invite all of you to continue to give us your input as we work to fulfill the potential and the promise of the Energy Transition Accelerator. Thanks a lot. I am supposed to introduce them. Well, every initiative has a little bit of failure in it. We're getting rid of it right up front. Andrew Steer, terrific partner in this, representing the Bezos Earth Fund. Thank you so much.
Wow, what about that? I bet you want to actually hear from the nations that are committing and the companies that are committing, so I will be very brief indeed. Secretary Kerry, first of all, thank you. Not only for this, but this is just one of the massive ideas that you've cooked up. that's going to make a difference. And this will be a successful COP. And you've played an amazing role, not only this COP, in previous COPs and the conversations you've had with China and others over recent weeks and months. Transformative. We are very, very grateful to you, sir. Thank you. Look, as Secretary Kerry said, we will need $1.9 trillion a year of investment in the emerging and developing countries, excluding China. That's a sevenfold increase. It doesn't need a PhD in finance to know that that's going to be hard work, and the diplomacy which has been incredibly successful recently in creating the just energy transition partnerships needs to be helped. Brilliant diplomacy, fantastic. But actually, the money that was promised is hard to come by. Half of it was supposed to come from the private sector. The private sector needs some comfort from improved policies and regulations, but also some de-risking. So too, the money that was supposed to come from the public sector is also hard to come by. I wonder why. Budgets are in very tight condition. Interest rates haven't come down, and debt is high. So we need some grants and some grant lookalikes to de-risk the massive amount of private investment that is required. And the beautiful thing about carbon markets is that every dollar that is moved to where it is needed not only gives a dollar of benefit, but also can help de-risk private investment, so actually has a multiple. And those huge numbers that Secretary Kerry gave illustrate that perfectly, this kind of multiplication. That's why we at the Bezos Earth Fund are so excited about it. When we make a grant, we ask two things of it. First, you have to deliver what you say you're going to deliver. Second, you have to be part of a movement that is going to actually change the world. We believe this investment does exactly that. Now, some people will be saying, for heaven's sake, you launched this a year ago, and now you're here launching it again. What have you been doing for the last year? Which is a good question, and I'm hoping our panelists will answer it. But the real answer is, my goodness me, the opportunities are huge and the risks are great. And we have used the last 12 months to have one of the most exciting intellectual and practical journeys that I've ever been on in my life. It is vital that we have high quality standards on both the demand side, and we've got the companies here today, and it will be wonderful to listen to them. These are leaders. No, you can't sign up for this unless you have a science-based target and you are already doing what you're supposed to do within your own Scope 1 and Scope 2 and starting on Scope 3. But actually doing the whole of Scope 3 right now is very hard work. And that's why BCMI last week came out with new regulations new standards to be discussed, which suggests half of your Scope 3 might be legitimate using carbon markets. That's the kind of creative thinking we want. And so too on the supply side, we need world-class supply, and that's why these 30 experts that we had over the last year included the leaders of all the major standard-setting institutions in the world on carbon markets, together with leading NGO voices and leading private sector voices. Incredibly exciting. And just finally, in all of this, the human dimension is absolutely vital. And I wanted to pay tribute to one of the members who was on the advisory group, Salim al-Haq, who has done more than anyone alive to emphasize the role of people, the importance of adaptation. He died, as you know, 2 months ago, and he is missed hugely at this conference here. But I want to thank him for what he did with us to make absolutely sure that this is not just about finance, it's not just about power stations, it's actually about people. So, welcome. Thank you for coming. It's clearly not a boring subject because there's still a queue outside wanting to get in. I want to, on our team, Kelly Kazaya has been leading. Please ask her the tough questions. And Paul Bogner here, who will, on a panel in a minute, explain the arcane finances that show these multiples. There's a 21-page paper that will be on the website immediately following this that gives you chapter and verse of everything. I want to now introduce Mandy Rambatas, who is the... Jürgen. I'm introducing Jürgen. It's so beautifully choreographed. It just took us a year to prepare this. And Jürgen Vogeli, who is the Vice President for Sustainable Development at the mighty World Bank, which is not only evolving, but you are transforming yourself to be a key part, and he's going to make an announcement here on behalf of Ajay Banga.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Secretary Kerry, for your extraordinary leadership, not only, as Andrew said, for this, but for so many things. We're intensely grateful for working with you. Liz, thank you. And Andrew, thank you. So I will deliver remarks on behalf of Ajay Banga, the President of the World Bank Group. And that means I will stick to the script, which is not what I normally do. I just want to say. So bear with me. 2 days ago, we at the World Bank announced our ambitious plans for the development of global carbon markets, with 15 countries set to earn income from the sale of carbon credits generated from preserving their forest. By next year, these countries will have produced over 95 million credits, rising to 270 million, actually by 2028, so in 5 years from now. These high-integrity credits in the forestry sector will bring transparency and trust. Both was mentioned by Andrew and by Secretary. Those are key factors. And they have the potential to transfer billions of dollars from companies and governments to poor communities. We need to focus now on broadening this experience from the forestry sector to other sectors. We in the bank have significant experience piloting similar programs in other areas like renewable energy and energy access, but we need to take this to scale to make a real difference in the battle with climate change. We all know the enormous challenge ahead. Clean future means a large-scale transformation of our economies, industries, and our daily lives. But developing countries face major barriers that are stopping these transitions from happening. Without access to more affordable sources of capital, developing countries often pay more for electricity, cannot access clean energy investments, and are locked into fossil fuel projects. It's a triple penalty for the energy transition. If left unaddressed, this can become both a poverty and an energy trap, making it hard for countries to break from fossil fuel infrastructure that is essentially locked in. The good news is that there are solutions within reach, and we've already heard exactly what the direction of travel is, and rest assured, World Bank will be a part of this. We will be a partner with everything and everybody that has to do with this, because nobody can do this alone. We have to do this together, because it's big, it's transformative, and it will have a massive impact if we get it right. It needs to tackle a few really tricky issues, like the coal phase-out, for starters. Today, there are over 2,100 megawatts of coal-fired power plants worldwide. In order to reach net zero by mid-century, we would need to decommission over 100 megawatts per year, which is equivalent of decommissioning one coal power plant per day until over the next 2 decades. But actually, we're headed in the opposite direction, and we must correct this immediately. We are clear-headed about the challenge. Changing direction is easier said than done. Coal is deeply embedded in the economies and livelihoods of some countries. Workers need support. You mentioned this is about the people at the end of the day, not only about the technology. Early retirement of coal generators could leave $1 trillion in stranded assets. Also something to really be mindful. So what will it take to get countries out of coal, specifically the lower and middle income countries that need to mobilize finance for clean energy at scale? It needs concessional resources, certainly, but there is also a major opportunity to unlock the potential of carbon markets to accelerate decarbonization and monetize these efforts, and that's what this is all about here. For carbon markets to work, we need robust monitoring, reporting, and verification systems to prove that an activity has actually avoided or removed harmful emissions. so that the carbon credits are real and that they are of high integrity. And high integrity means environmental integrity, and it means social integrity. I think it's a really, really important part. And this is one reason why they take longer than they did in the past, and why the low-quality ones are faster. If you want social integrity, you have work to do. You got to really understand who gets the money, how. This takes time to prepare. So we're ready to help establish this bridge between the supply and demand of these credits. How? We bring about 20 years of experience supporting carbon markets by partnerships with developing countries through our Scaling Climate Action by Lowering Emissions, in brackets SCALE, initiative. As part of this collaboration, we will be supporting our clients to build capacity to generate these high-integrity verifiable credits. We will ensure that this is done in a participatory and inclusive way by applying our environment and social safeguards and through our comprehensive approach to social inclusion and benefit sharing with communities. And we commit to providing results-based climate finance payments for enough emissions units that are reduced, making the project viable. We include the possibility of providing a floor price, which is what we have done with FCPF over the past few years, to actually have this market start up. We would allow countries to opt out of scale payments and access carbon markets, thus minimizing the use of concessional finance. The institutional infrastructure and capacity building will enable countries to access carbon markets. So one of the most powerful outcomes of this collaboration with the ETA will be the hands-on element in which countries will be able to model and replicate this for themselves. And the lessons learned from energy transition in one part of the world can drive action elsewhere and deliver real benefits for people and communities. So we can do this. We can do it together, and we can do it fast, but it will take everything that we have in this room and beyond to move forward. Rest assured, the World Bank is committed to this agenda, and we will step up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for our first panel, and now we're going to welcome our second panel and do a little transition here, so everyone can stay in your seats. Thank you. Give them a round of applause, please.
And now it is Mandy Rambaitis from the Environmental Defense Fund. Vice President has played an incredibly important role. It's been great that we've had both EDF and C2ES leading so much of the technical work over the last year. Over to you, Mandy.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. The opening panel was amazing. As I said, I'm Mandy Rambaitis from the Environmental Defense Fund, and we've had the pleasure of working on ETA, and particularly the Just Transition Framework and Safeguards for the Carbon Standard. All of the speakers mentioned the importance of people and the human element to this work, and so the Just Transition is core to the ETA. The people element, the social element is important, and that's something that's extremely important for us to drive. So we're going to introduce our esteemed panel, our country representatives this morning that have taken hands with us and are happy to join with us on the ETA. So I'm going to call them up in order. If you could please just join me on the stage here. So Michael Abento, who is the Director for Energy at the National Council on Climate Change from Nigeria. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. Dr. Matt Peary, the Head of Delegation and the Executive Vice President of the National Council for Climate Change in the Dominican Republic, joining us. And Julio Cordano, who is the Chief of Environment and Climate Change and Oceans Ministry of External Relations, Chile. Julio and I have been through some of the trenches in Article 6, so we know each other from that past life. Charlie, you're more than welcome welcome to join us on the stage and be helping Dr. Pierre with his remarks as well. So, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're very excited to have you here with us. And as I said in my introductory remarks, the just transition is core center to the energy transition. And so what I would like for each of you to do is to help us to set the scene a little bit on the just energy transition. What does it look like in your countries? And if you would take a few minutes to share with us the challenges and the opportunities that you see facing your country as you seek to accelerate this decarbonization that all of our speakers spoke to this morning, that is absolutely necessary for us to meet the kind of goals of the Paris Agreement, of this whole conference. But we know, coming from developing countries, myself coming from developing countries, what the challenges are, but that there are also opportunities. So, Michael, can I start with you, just to share with us what you see as the opportunities and challenges?
Thanks very much, Mandy. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thanks very much to Secretary Kerry and the ETA Coalition for really putting this very important initiative together. For us in Nigeria, this represents a very important pathway forward to helping to close the energy gap that we have in the country. We are roughly about 220 million people. Largely, about 70% of this population is underserved, cut off from the grid, really. And a significant part of this population is the men, women, and children who really need access to electricity for one form of self-support or the other, from hospitals to schools to homes who need for cooling, especially now where we have really high temperatures around the country. So that problem is further, exacerbated by the degraded infrastructure for transmission and distribution of electricity, especially, and therefore we have a multitude of hurdles to tackle with respect to the challenges there. But the opportunities exist in terms of the fact that there's a market that needs to be served, and the evolving regulatory framework to support additional investments. For example, the adoption of the IFRS sustainability and ESG reporting standards for the country really, indicates that the country is ready to, really provide the sort of system that really makes it easy for people to know that we are open to looking at our books in a way that gives us climate sensitivity. The other thing is that we have done in the last couple of years is to deregulate the electricity industry, making it easier for private sector participation and the devolution of powers from the federal government to the state governments. And therefore, there's multiple levels of transactions and authorizations that you need for simple electricity projects have been significantly removed, making it easier for you to move from concept to execution in a much, much shorter time. And with respect to the climate sensitivity, we have demonstrated one of the most important commitments by removing fossil subsidy, which used to be a really important aspect of helping to put a stranglehold on fossil fuel. So now the removal of fossil subsidy frees up some money to be able to make some investments. And with respect to de-risking the ETA components of it, some of that could be repurposed to helping to provide counterpart funding on the government side to support the investments from the ETA proponents, for example.
Wonderful. Thanks, Michael. I think all the things you said couldn't be more perfect in terms of demonstrating the complexity of the decarbonization. It's not just about let's just shut down the fossil assets, but deregulation, de-risking, all of those elements, and you've touched on all of those, so thanks very much for that. Dr. Pierre, can I turn to you in terms of what the challenges you are facing in the Dominican Republic around the transition?
Thank you. On behalf of the Dominican Republic, I am the Vice President of the National Council of Climate Change. And I am here with Ms. Shadia Abreu from the Minister of Energy and Mines. And we would like to express the gratitude for the invitation to join the Energy Transition Accelerator in this initiative as a pilot country. I am pleased to accompany you and ETA partners during this event and inform this promising initiative finalized and formally launched in 2024. It is important to remark that Dominican Republic is one of the fastest growing economies in Latin America. In the last 2 years, the electricity demands has grown vigorously and sustainably compared to previous periods. In 2023, the maximum annual demand for capacity has grown by approximately 14% compared to 2022. To work with this situation, the Dominican Republic created this Council of Climate Change. And in this council, we work together with the president of this council is the Dominican Republic president. And the secretary of this council is the Minister of Environmental Questions, and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Finance, Energy, Industry, Agriculture, Tourism. We are all together in this council. I will ask Ms. Shadia Abreu. He's coming with me. She is part of Minister of Energy to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Shadia.
Thank you, Dr. Wang, and I'll be very brief. Thank you, Dr. Puig. Okay. And I'll be very brief, just following up on his remarks. As one of the fastest growing countries, but also as an island country, climate vulnerability, it's affecting us dramatically. So we are very committed to our energy transition and accelerating this process. However, energy security is still a priority because we're not interconnected to any other country. So now we're seeing with a really high penetration of renewable energies, storage it's not even an option for us. It's a necessity. So deciding what is the timeline when we're going to do things, it's even harder for us because we're forced to do things even before than some other countries, and our decisions are based on system needs rather than financial needs. So we see ETA as a really big opportunity just for capacity building, technical support, and just we are really appreciative of the scope that ETA proposes and how broad it is, understanding that the needs of the energy transition come from changing our generation matrix, but also infrastructure, transmission, and also making sure that the benefits of the program reach the most vulnerable communities and the people. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I think that's the beauty of the ETA. It's not limited in terms of what the revenues could be used for, and storage absolutely on top of that list. So thank you for bringing that point out. Julio, over to you. Talk about Chile.
Thank you very much, Mandy, and thank you very much also to the U.S. and to the Secretary Kerry for this initiative. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, really. And let me say just a few features of our own circumstances that are so make a good match with this initiative. Chile is very much a believer in the importance of public and private partnerships. Our energy sector is mostly private, and therefore we are used to work with the private sector in order to leverage funds and leverage finance in order to accelerate our transition. our transition is very much underway, and I think it's important to say Chile has been a place of a revolution in renewables in the last few years, and therefore we have achieved a moment where we are facing some bottlenecks, some hurdles, some challenges that need that probably are really in the forefront of the global discussion on the global challenges of energy transition. Like, for example, storage. I think storage is absolutely key. For example, we have maybe an overcapacity at the moment compared to our transmission lines of production of energy renewables, and therefore we need to invest much more in our transmission lines. We need to invest much more in storage. And some private sector companies in Chile have announced already a lot of substantial investments in renewables because it's a good business, because it's profitable. But at the same time, I think I wanted to underline one very important aspect of the energy transition is that as every transition needs to be just, it needs to be inclusive. It needs to consider those that maybe are energy poor. Energy poverty is a huge problem everywhere, and Chile is not an exception. We have, as you know, I'm sure you are familiar with the geography of Chile, but Chile is a very long and narrow country, 4,000 kilometers long. So there are places, and also we are a mountainous country on top of it. So there are places in Chile that are very hard to access, even in winter in the south, for example. So those places are sometimes not connected to the grid. So they cannot receive the benefit of this energy revolution that we are living through. And at the same time, those are isolated communities, sometimes, indigenous communities that are affected by this isolation. And they rely on fossil fuels most of the time. So targeting those communities, those medium systems that need to be addressed and transform them into resilient and renewable energy demand, I think it would be a huge step. It would be just, it would be inclusive, and also it would be inclusive in terms of the access to renewable energies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julio, and thank you so much to our panel. I wish we had more time because you all have touched on exactly the kinds of innovation that the ETA will be actually able to fund, which would be actually able to touch on. So just a huge round of thank you to our panel again for... And I'm going to hand over to Nat, who is going to introduce the next panel and take us through the company profiles. Thank you.
One more round of applause for our amazing panel.
Thanks very much, Mandy, and thanks to everybody. And it's great to see a packed crowd here. So we're going to wrap this up with another part of the really important part of the story. We've got three representatives from some of the companies that Secretary Kerry mentioned that have expressed interest in engaging with us and continuing on. I'm just going to call them up really quickly with their intros, and we'll dive right in. First, we have Jim Andrew, the Chief Sustainability Officer from PepsiCo. We've got Ellen Jakowski, the Chief Sustainability Officer from MasterCard. Wendy Woods, who is the Vice Chair for Social Impact for Climate and Sustainability at the Boston Consulting Group. Chris Leeds, who is the Head of Carbon Markets Development at Standard Chartered. And we'll also be joined by Paul Bodner, who is the Director at the Bezos Earth Fund. So please join me in welcoming the panel. So I'll say briefly, I'm Nat Cohen. I'm the President of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. We're really pleased to have been helping the ETA partners design this initiative alongside EDF. We focus particularly on the crediting standard piece and on the work with companies, which is why I have the pleasure of talking with folks here. I know we have a limited amount of time. I'm going to try to go through 2 rounds pretty quickly with us on the companies, but we'll be quick, and then we'll have some questions on the finance, and we'll get us out of here, I think, pretty soon. So, Jim, let me start with you. I want to briefly cover sort of where does the energy transition fit into your company's climate action strategy, and how does the ETA help? And then we're going to talk a little bit about the credit quality and the use. But Jim, PepsiCo, global energy, purchaser, how do you think about this fitting into your strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Nat. PepsiCo's in 200 countries and territories, so pretty much everywhere there's a need everywhere. And really what we're looking at, we have very aggressive goals. We've said that we'll be net zero by 2040, down 30% by 2030, and 100% renewable electricity. But in many geographies today, especially in developing and emerging markets, we're constrained. We're constrained because of either policy or economics. And so as we look at something like the ETA, it provides more flexibility into that portfolio of solutions, right? What we do on-site whenever we can. But how do we move to things like off-site PPAs, but then also high-integrity carbon market as a way to facilitate and provide more options? And that's really what we're looking for, is that flexibility with that integrity. You know, we don't have the luxury of time, and so we need things that provide more capital, as Secretary Kerry said, more capital, more flexibility, and importantly, more speed.
Super, thanks. And so, Ellen, to you, how does MasterCard think about the global clean energy transition in the context of your broader commitment to climate action, and how can the ETA help?
Sure, thanks, Matt. Hello? Oh, there we go. All right, well, thank you, Nat. So for MasterCard, similarly, we have a net zero goal by 2040. And for us, we are already using 100% renewable electricity, but about 60% or so is from unbundled RECs. And again, similar to Pepsi, we operate in more than 200 countries worldwide. And what's interesting for our industry is there is an effort towards localization, where many countries are requiring us to operate our data centers and have all of the transaction data sit within the country. So while this transition is happening, those types of requirements mean that we definitely need to have access to renewable energy directly in the country where this localization is occurring. So for us, the ETA is really offering this approach where we can have now access in developing countries specifically. And I also just want to mention, our commitment to an inclusive climate transition is extremely important here. So for us, the emphasis on inclusivity and a just transition is key.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks for mentioning that critical piece of the just transition that's part of this. Wendy, to you and BCG's view on the global energy transition and how ETA fits.
Yeah, two different perspectives from us. One, for BCG, we've got ambitious goals too. We're striving to be net zero by 2030. For us, most of it is scope 3. Our energy part is easy for us, but actually getting the rest out is really hard. We've actually we're ahead of our schedule. We've dropped and reduced per head our carbon intensity by more than 50% already, ahead of our goals. But we need to do more. And doing more is really hard. We've got 10x the SAF usage of average out there already. But how do we help and use credits and use really high carbon credits to get the dirtiest sources of carbon, the most intense sources of carbons out for the part where we actually need to use credits on our path to net zero? And so what we want to do is not find the low-cost credits. We have committed to paying by 2030 $80 a ton, but what we're looking for are those good credits. And we see ETA as a really powerful source of how can we use our credits and our commitments to actually reduce the parts of the carbon chain that need to come out first. That's one. Second, we actually facilitate for a lot of our clients their purchasing agreements. It is really hard. All of those challenges we just heard from the countries. The renewables aren't in the right places. The grid infrastructure doesn't carry it where it needs to be. How can this accelerate the pace, get the money into the places in the countries to do those things we all need to do to even have the things we need to purchase available?
Terrific. Thanks. Thanks, Wendy, and I love that dual nature of what you see. So I want to come back actually to the three companies, and then we're going to talk about finance at the end. But so let me come back. A core part that I think folks have heard throughout this presentation, and Secretary Kerry started off with it, is environmental integrity. That's critical to the effort. That's why I know Bezos Earth Fund and the Rockefeller Foundation are part of this. That's, of course, critical to the State Department and to all of us involved. And we think about that in the carbon markets. That's partly on the quality of credits, and there's been a lot of concern, I don't have to tell folks, in the rest of the carbon markets about carbon market quality. The ETA partners engaged Winrock International and an Environmental Resources Trust. I think Mary Grady is here, to develop an independent crediting standard that the ETA Coalition expects to be able to use. So that would be an independent standard, but one that ETA hopes to use. That we did that with the aim of real high integrity, and at the same time, we've also done a lot of work thinking about how these credits can be used by companies in a high integrity way. And so I want to turn back to the panel briefly. We keep hearing, when we've talked with you all throughout the last 12 months, the one thing we keep hearing is integrity, integrity, integrity. How do you think about what needs to happen and as we go forward, or what you've seen in the ETA on that quality side or on the demand side, how you would use these credits as part of your strategy?
Yeah, two things. Secretary Kerry used a great word, which was supplemental. We do not see these as a primary driver of all the activities we have underway. We're 93% Scope 3. The single biggest lever we have with our suppliers and our extended ecosystem is renewable electricity. Being able to get that into all the places that we operate is very, very important. But it's supplemental to all the other things we're doing. That's one. On the integrity piece, you had a long list of organizations. All the companies up here care at least as much, if not more, about integrity. Because the last thing in the world any of us want is to be accused of greenwashing because of all the great work and all the expense that we're putting in other areas. So integrity, integrity, integrity. The additions, we have to have real reductions. They have to be additional, right? I think you're going to find that very consistent. We also, though, need to be able to move quickly, have that flexibility. And so that's why we're so excited about the ETA. It's another piece in the portfolio of solutions that will allow us to, not only ourselves, but our extended value chain, and we hope the market as a whole, accelerate the clean energy transition.
Great, thanks. Ellen, to you.
Sure. Well, at MasterCard, trust is essentially one of the key things that we provide and sell and offer to our value chain every day. So through our 90 million merchants, our 20,000 banking partners, and over the 3 billion card holders that we have, having trust in our network, trust in our company, and trust in our actions on the environment and the communities that are being affected is absolutely essential. So the high integrity nature of the program of the ETA is at the core of why we are interested in joining. The organizations, as you've mentioned, that we're partnering with to help make sure that integrity is at the core, it's essential to us.
Thanks. Wendy.
I just add two things briefly. The first one is integrity and credibility and recognition of that. So the role that SBTI and VCMI are going to play in actually recognizing this is going to be incredibly important in making this doable for all of us. I think that's one. And then secondarily, within the countries and the mechanisms, we need transparency, we need clarity, we need vehicles that are going to actually make sure that we have assurance that when the funding goes into the countries, it's being used on the right projects in the right places. Those are being delivered on time for the credits that we're all expecting. So I'm really glad we're turning to the conversation on how do we actually operationalize this in a credible way.
Thanks, Wendy. You make the moderator's job really easy. So we're going to go next to our final two panelists and talk about the financing side about this. How do we take that credit revenue and turn it into investment up front that the countries need to accelerate the transition, and where does that fit in the broader perspective? So Chris, first to you, Chris Lee. So Standard Chartered is a company that signed the letter of interest, but also you, Chris, as a representative of GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, were one of the partners in helping to design, in particular, how we think about the investment vehicle that could be part of the ETA coalition. So can you give us a high-level overview of how are we thinking about what that vehicle looks like? How do we use these credit revenues, which come later after the emissions reductions are made? How do we use them to catalyze investment up front to accelerate the transition?
Yeah, thanks, Nat. And just very quickly, I'd also like to point out, as Standard Chartered, one of the reasons why we got involved in the first place is because many of our clients are based in these emerging markets. We have a very strong interest in supporting the decarbonisation of these countries, particularly places like Nigeria, Indonesia, Vietnam, and elsewhere. So we really think it's got a great deal of potential there. And another hat I wear, I'm also on the board of the ICVCM, and obviously involved with the work that you do, Nat. and looking at that integrity piece, and that's something that the bank is really, really keen on, right, and to ensure that this whole market has high integrity. But in terms of the financing, so the brief that we were given really was to look at how we can get upfront financing into these projects, because there is going to be a huge amount of money that is needed to do that transformation. And much of it is going to need to come up front. Now, we could assume that governments are going to provide that, but that's quite a big assumption, particularly, again, when you're looking at emerging markets. So, how do we actually get that money brought in up front into these projects in a credible way, in a way that also buyers are going to say, and investors are going to say, well, I'm willing to commit that money, so that I'm confident and I can see how these emissions reductions are going to take place. Obviously, you have the methodology that we're working on, which gives the recipe, if you like, the steps that need to be taken. But then you need to know that that's actually going to happen. So that's essentially what we've looked at. We looked at a range of different options, all the way from just basically having a set of upfront or a set of offtake agreements that then can be used to establish some kind of credibility and some kind of revenue cash flow forecast for that project, all the way through to something where there's essentially an off-balance sheet vehicle that's a public-private partnership that allows you to actually put money into a structure that's going to be very, very very clear in terms of the way that money is spent. So there's a number of different ranges that we went through, and it really just depends on the governments and on the appetite for investors. So we just really wanted to lay that out as much as we possibly could.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. So, Paul, I'm going to turn to you last. Tell us, connect the dots for us a little bit here. At the very outset, Secretary Kerry talked about the kind of capital this could mobilize, the kind of finance we think it could mobilize, and that happens through the purchase of the credits and then through the vehicle that Chris just talked about. How does the ETA fit into the broader finance mobilization perspective? And I know you'll cite, so I'll just say the last of the groups to work with us, and I see Vikram Wij in the back, the Climate Policy Initiative did a lot of the work for the ETA partners on how this fits into the finance mobilization stream, and of course, Paul, you were part of that on behalf of Bezos. So connect the dots for us.
Thanks, Nat. So, the key question here is how can ETA play a very significant role in helping developing countries to accelerate their power sector transition faster than it would otherwise go? And how can the revenues from carbon credits be structured in a way that really does that? So power sector transition is expensive, and you might divide the costs into two broad buckets. One is costs that could be structured commercially as investment, building new renewable energy, transmission and distribution, depends on the country, but let's take that as one bucket, right, where you can attract private investment in and it generates a return. The second category is non-commercial costs, the costs of achieving a just transition through just transition programs, the early decommissioning of coal-fired power. And what the CPI analysis found was rather striking for this sample of three large developing countries with significant coal capacity, which is that depending on the price that you assume for the ETA credits, ETA carbon credit revenues can actually cover up to 100% of the non-commercial costs of accelerated power transition, sector transition. And if you zoom out and include the commercial piece, which is much larger, renewable energy and transmission and distribution, ETA revenues could cover between 20% and a third of total power sector transition costs. That is a very large number because the numbers themselves, the raw numbers that Secretary Kerry mentioned earlier, are very large. And as Chris said, the question is how do you pull forward pay on delivery carbon credit revenues to really generate the kind of upfront financing that's needed? And that we lay out a few options in the document that we put out.
Thanks, Paul. So that's going to conclude our panel. Before I wrap us up for the session, I just want to say, if you're interested in learning more, we have created an ETA website that has all the information you've heard about today. That is at etaccelerator.org. So etaccelerator, one word, .org. And I just want to thank our panelists, Jim, Ellen, Wendy, Chris, and Paul. I want to thank our panelists earlier from Nigeria, the Dominican Republic, and Chile. And of course, I want to thank the partners, the U.S. State Department, Bezos Earth Fund, and the Rockefeller Foundation. On behalf of all of the folks who have worked to make this happen, thanks to all of you for joining, and this concludes the session.